I just wanted to say what a tremendous honor it is to be given this award by the Washington Institute. I have to say, when I said to my oldest college friend that I was getting an award as a Scholar-Statesman, he said, "Scholar, there must be some mistake, surely." But it's a deep, deep privilege to be with you here this evening, and in particular to be with Howard Berkowitz, who I met out in Jerusalem, and who I formed a very strong attachment to the very first time I met him. I think he's a wonderful person. I know he's done great work for the Institute, and I'm really delighted and proud to be here with him tonight and him getting honored too. So thank you, Howard. And most of all, thank you very much for this award. It's amazing how nice people are to you once you stop being Prime Minister. Now, what I'm going to do is give some brief opening remarks, and then Rob and I are going to have a session together there. And really what I want to focus on, I've no doubt we will talk about the Middle East peace process, but I want to focus on the broader threat just in my initial remarks. The warnings of the past days of terrorist attacks in Europe remind us the security threat is still very much with us. The extremism remains alive. We see it in bombs in Baghdad or Kabul, but also in terrorist acts in Pakistan, Somalia, Yemen, Kashmir, Chechnya, across swathes of the Middle East and beyond. The past 10 years have seen 150,000 people die in the Mindanao dispute in the Philippines alone. The policy choices from 9/11 onwards were and are immensely difficult, but eventually they come down to this. Do we confront this extremist ideology in order to change it? Or do we manage it and hope in time it changes itself? I still find this judgment hard to make, but on balance, I don't believe that it can be benignly managed out of existence. Its roots are too deep, its narrative too pervasive. And so I believe we need a revolution in our thinking. I do not think it is possible to defeat the extremism without defeating the narrative that nurtures it. And there's the rub. The practitioners of the extremism are small in number. The adherents of the narrative stretch far broader into parts of mainstream thinking. And what is this narrative? It is that Islam is basically oppressed by the West, disrespected and treated unfairly, that the military action we took post 9/11 was against countries because they are Muslim, and that in the Middle East we ignore the injustice done to Palestinians in our desire to support Israel because the Palestinians are Muslims and the Israelis predominantly Jews. It is a narrative that now has vast numbers of assembled websites, blogs, and organizations. And of course, many of those that agree with this narrative abhor the terrorism. But as the support across the Middle East for the Muslim Brotherhood shows, far too many buy into far too much of the analysis of the extremists, if not their methodology. You know, when Pastor Jones was going to burn the Quran, he was rightly and roundly condemned for it by everyone from President Obama down. But what intrigued me was why such condemnation was necessary, and by the way, it was necessary. Suppose an imam with 50, or was it by the end 30 followers in Karachi, was to burn a Bible. I can barely imagine a murmur of protest. It wouldn't be necessary for the president of Pakistan to condemn it because no one here would remotely consider he supported it. The irony is that the many Muslims who believe passionately in coexistence and tolerance are not empowered, but frequently disempowered by our refusal to confront this narrative. We think if we sympathize with the narrative, that essentially this extremism has risen as a result partly of our actions, if we meet it halfway, we help the modernizers to be more persuasive. We don't. We indulge it and we weaken them. Worse, a reaction springs up amongst our own people that we are pandering to this narrative, and they start to resent Muslims as a whole. And this is because implicit in this indulgence is an acceptance of the argument that Islam, and for want of a better term, the West, are fundamentally in conflict. So in my judgment, what we should be doing instead is confronting the narrative head-on, forming an alliance across the faiths and across the divides of culture and civilization to defeat it. Now, President Obama gave the template for this brilliantly in the Cairo speech, but we need to act on it. We should point out with vigor that in Kosovo, America and Britain went to the aid of Kosovan Muslims, and not because they were Muslim, but because they were a people in distress. That 9/11 was an utterly unprovoked attack on all of any faith who share civilized values. That in Iraq and Afghanistan, whatever you think of the original action, we enabled the people to choose their government. They did so. And the terrorism that now seeks to destabilize both countries is not about some so-called liberation from occupation, but is actually about attacking fellow Muslims just because they want the same freedoms as we have. That though, of course, there can be many legitimate criticisms of Israeli policy, Israel has a clear right to exist. Terrorism is the enemy of peace, and also that the biggest funders of the Palestinians this year, with half of the money going to people in Gaza, will be the United States and the European Union. So we push forward the peace between Israel and Palestine, as Secretary Clinton and Senator Mitchell and all of us are working for. The conflict there is not the source of extremism, but progress there removes much of the poison which the extremists use. But let us be firm about the basis for such a plan. A viable state of Palestine that offers the Palestinian people the dignity and justice of statehood, but alongside a secure state of Israel, because Israel's security is not a strategic interest simply of Israelis, but of all of us. And we should make it crystal clear to Iran, acquiring a nuclear weapon is unacceptable not just to America, but to the civilized world. And if people say, why should India or France have a nuclear bomb, but not Iran? I say, go and read the speech of Iran's president to the United Nations just days ago here in New York, and tell me that is someone you want with a nuclear bomb. And finally, we should wake up to the absurdity of our surprise at the prevalence of this extremism. Look at the funds it receives. Examine the education systems that succor it. And then measure over the years the paucity of our counterattack in the name of peaceful coexistence. We have been outspent, outmaneuvered, and outstrategized, and it's time it stopped. So my conclusion is that we must act with resolution and also with intelligence. Sometimes this policy choice is presented as a struggle between a foreign policy based on principle and one based on pragmatism. In reality, in my experience in politics, principles without a practical plan result in inefficacy. But pragmatism, unless driven by principle, can result in avoiding the challenge rather than answering it. At stake in this challenge, I believe, are the values of the civilized world, those that unite civilized people of all faiths and none. Needed is a plan to defend those values effectively, but the plan will be better motivated and better implemented if it is done with the principles we believe in, the values we hold dear, and the values that are worth standing up, believing in, and fighting for. Thank you.